So as we've begun to use it, we have found some applications that are clearly problematic
Hmm.
and can mislead us, can hurt the quality of our work, and I would even say at times dehumanize us.
Hmm.
And I think that's a key question, like what is the human, what is the artificial? When does something that is artificial actually assist and bless our humanity and help us to be better at doing human things? And when does it subtract?
Anchored is a production of the Classic Learning Test, based in Annapolis, Maryland, reconnecting knowledge and virtue through meaningful assessments. Visit us at cltexam.com/get started.
It's time to go hard after the College Board. The first 10 years was the PSAT, the ACT, the SAT. The next 10 years, we're going after College Board's advanced placement. And sometimes when I tell the CLT story, folks will say, it seemed like AP was as influential in wanting to challenge a College Board as the SAT or the PSAT. And that's absolutely true. So why didn't we start there? And the answer was, how would you do that? It just seemed too big. It seemed too impossible. It seemed hard enough to try to start with an alternative to the SAT. But after 10 years and some traction and your support, this is what we want to do. So our team has been working on enduring courses. We've got a great logo there, a great CLT marketing team. Let's hear it from marketing. Taryn, Billy, Alex, Lash, you guys, it's beautiful, mind-blowing the work that you're doing. So thank you so much for that. We had our very first test ever. Annapolis, just a couple blocks away, was our biggest testing site with like 9 students. This was June of 2016. And we had a grand total of 46 students nationwide. I was a one-person operations team. It didn't go well, even with 46 students only. But we went from 46 students on the first test. This coming academic year, we're projecting around 400,000 test takers from grades 3 through 12. So it's been an incredible journey. A little secret, some of you have figured this out already. I don't actually really run CLT. It's true. I talk about CLT. I talk trash to the College Board on Twitter about CLT. But I don't really run CLT. So we need somebody to do that. CLT about a year and a half ago moved over to what's called a traction model for a company, kind of a visionary integrator model. One of the first things we did as part of the Annapolis Summit was an all-staff meeting where Katie Prefontaine was promoted in that from chief of staff to chief operating officer. Katie, stand up if you would. Katie's a graduate of Calvin University, and if it seems like CLT is more organized than I am, Katie Prefontaine is a reason that is the case. Katie's going to come up now and introduce Dr. Angel Adams Parham, who has been the president of the CLT Board of Academic Advisors for 4 years now. Later this morning, we're going to have a ceremonial kind of actual torch passing ceremony in a bit. Katie, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jordan. Awesome. It is my privilege to introduce us to our first panel leader today. I'm so grateful for Angel and her leadership at CLT over the years. Definitely, if you're in the back, feel free to fill in the front, too, if you want to get cozy. Soren is very nice. As promised, he does invite. So, with that, Dr. Angel Adams Parham is Associate Professor of Sociology and Senior Fellow of the Institute of Advanced Studies in Culture at the University of Virginia. Parham is passionate about education across the K-16 educational spectrum. At the college level, she is the Associate Director of the Political and Social Thought major at the University of Virginia and does research in historical sociology, examining the past in order to better understand how to live well in the present and envision wisely for the future. At the K-12 level, she homeschooled her daughters from pre-K through 9th grade and is the co-founder and executive director of Nyanza Classical Community, an educational nonprofit focused on K-12 students, which creates classical curricula for schools and homeschools. Parham is the co-author with Anika Prather of The Black Intellectual Tradition, Reading Freedom in Classical Literature, published by Classical Academic Press. In addition to publishing scholarly work in various journals with the Oxford University Press, Parham has written for popular outlets including The Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Public Discourse, The Hedgehog Review, and Common Good magazine. She's contributing editor to Comment magazine, Public Theology for the Common Good. Parham completed her BA in sociology at Yale University, her PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and was the recipient of a Fulbright grant. And with that, please join me in welcoming Angel Adams Parham.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me? It is such an honor and a privilege to be here. I am just stunned that it is 4 years since Jeremy asked me to chair the Board of Academic Advisors, and it has really been such an energizing time. It's wonderful to look out and see all of the friendly faces of people that I've gotten to know over the last 4 years. So many congratulations, Jeremy, for the milestones, the blowing up of the CLT in the best possible ways, and looking forward to the second decade. So I am here to lead our opening panel, which will be on AI, our favorite topic, and classical education. And so we have an esteemed group who will be on the panel, and so I will introduce them, give you their bios, which will not be able to give you everything of how awesome they are, and then we will get started. So first, Dr. Christopher Perrin is author, consultant, and speaker who specializes in classical education. He's committed to the renewal of the liberal arts tradition, co-founded and serves full-time as the CEO publisher of Classical Academic Press. He is the director of the Alcuin Fellowship with the Institute for Classical Schools and the former board vice president for the Society for Classical Learning. He's published numerous articles and lectures that are widely used throughout the United States and the English-speaking world. Dr. Perrin received his BA in history from the University of South Carolina and his MDiv and PhD in apologetics from Westminster Theological Seminary. He was also a special student in literature at St. John's College here in Annapolis, Maryland. He's taught at Messiah College, Chesapeake Theological Seminary, and served as the founding headmaster of a classical school in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for 10 years. He's the author of the Greek Alphabet Codecracker and Greek for Children, and the co-author of the Latin for Children series, all published by Classical Academic Press. Please welcome Dr. Perrin to the stage. Yes. Next, we have Dr. Brian Williams. He is the Dean of the Templeton Honors College, Associate Professor of Ethics and Liberal Studies, and co-director of Templeton's Master of Arts in Teaching. Before coming to Eastern, he was lecturer in theology and Christian ethics at the University of Oxford and director of Oxford Conversations. He holds an MPhil and DPhil in Christian ethics from the University of Oxford, where he was a Clarendon Scholar, an MA and THM in systematic and historical theology from Regent College, and a BA in biblical studies from Ozark Christian College. His current research examines the tradition of Christian liberal arts education, focusing on the works of Hugh of St. Victor, Philip Melanchthon, John Henry Newman, and others. Dr. Williams's broad academic interests include virtue ethics, Christian and Muslim political thought, Karl Barth's theology and politics, contemporary classical education, and Dante Alighieri's Commedia. He is the author of The Potter's Rib, The History, Theology, and Practice of Mentoring for Pastoral Formation. Dr. Williams is a National Alcuin Fellow, a Research Fellow with the Institute of Classical Education, a member of the Academic Board of Advisors here at the CLT, and an advisory board member for the Classical Liberal Education Network. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Brian Williams. And 1 minute. Okay. Erin Valdez is the executive director of the Incubator for the Center for Education and Public Service at the University of Austin. She has been passionate about the transformational power of education all her life. Having been given the gift of being homeschooled, she taught for over a decade in Austin area schools and served as an assistant principal at a charter school in Louisville. These experiences have given her the opportunity to see firsthand how students can thrive when they have excellent options. Valdez joined the Carl Koch Foundation in 2015, where she helped to grow a portfolio focused on helping innovative K-12 programs grow through higher education and other partnerships. At the Texas Public Policy Foundation, she conducted research on outcomes-based funding at the secondary and post-secondary levels, civics education, and workforce programs in Texas. She has testified before the Texas and U.S. legislatures and shepherded legislation expanding educational choices for K-12 and post-secondary students. Valdez earned her MA in Classics from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and a BA in Classical Studies from Hillsdale College. She studied in Athens, Greece, her junior year, and worked as an excavator at the Agora Archaeological Site for 3 seasons. Please welcome Miss Erin Valdez. All right. So I thought we would start out by if each of you could just tell us something of how AI has become something that you have to reckon with in the work that you do. So just kind of get out there what you've been seeing, what you've been dealing with, and then I have some follow-up questions. And I think we can just start and go down the line with Chris.
Okay. Darn. Erin and I had nominated Brian to go first and talk most. We have to reckon with it. We decided about 2 years ago that we needed to understand what AI was by experimenting with it and using it. So as a company, we got an account with ChatGPT for our senior leadership and then eventually for others. And we started with a policy of let's use this to understand it. Let's try to define it. And let's research how other companies are using it. We like to think of Classical Academic Press as a fast follower kind of company. We don't like to be the first doing anything, but we want to watch others and then follow once we have been able to, ascertain that something is really wise and prudent and good to use. So as we've begun to use it, we have found some applications that are clearly problematic and can mislead us, can hurt the quality of our work, and I would even say at times dehumanize us. And I think that's a key question, like what is the human, what is the artificial? When does something that is artificial actually assist and bless our humanity and help us to be better at doing human things? And when does it subtract? And we've discovered that AI is not one thing. We use this phrase, artificial intelligence, and even it's problematic. It begs the question, what is intelligence? How do you define that? And then it begs the question, if it's artificial, then what is human intelligence? Do we even know what that is? So that we can do a proper comparison. But as we're using it, this question keeps bubbling up. Is this enhancing our humanity? Is it helping others to grow and flourish as humans? Or is it detracting? And what temptations are present? But one of the things we have all confessed is that AI is many things at once, and it has to be defined. What AI are you talking about? What use case are we speaking of? And we're all using it, whether we realize it or not. If you have a smartphone, you're using it. It's embedded now in so many of the products we use. If you do a Google search, as you well know now, it's there. And sometimes I'm sure you find yourself thinking, oh, this is helpful. I'm just going to use I'm just going to start, because now it's at the top of your search, right? Mm-hmm. And then if you actually have an account with, say, ChatGPT, if you use this a year and a half ago, one of our complaints was, you use it, you're looking, you ask it a question, it gives you some feedback. It doesn't even give you any sources. You can't trust it. It's hallucinating. It doesn't get no sources. Why should I believe this? That's crazy. And then 6 months later, it gives you all the sources. Right. And you can click right to them. And I'll stop with one little use case for you. I was working on a project, and I remember thinking to myself, what? Augustine says somewhere, and I think it's book 11 of the Confessions, he's talking about time. And he says something like this, I know what time is until someone asks me to define it. And where did he say that? I need that quote. I want that quote right now. And so I went to ChatGPT and I said, where does he say this? And I said, could you give it to me in the Latin and the English? And it did. It was book 11, if I recall, and grabbed it, put it right into my footnote, this is amazing. But then afterwards, reflecting on it, I realized what I didn't do, which was what I used to do, which is to go find that little Loeb Library edition of Confessions and pull it off the shelf and start looking for that quote. And in the process, get reacquainted with the whole work again, looking at my notes, reading, and maybe I would be distracted for 15 or 20 minutes. I'm back in Augustine's world. But now I can just be a pass-through technology. I can just be an extension of like a Google search. And so you see how two things are true at once: the utility, the quickness. And if it's in a domain in which I know something, like if I know that book pretty well, it's actually a big time saver. But you can see a 19-year-old using this tool and never, ever picking up the Confessions, but still getting the quotes right. So this kind of illustrates that use case illustrates the tension that we experience at CAP, where we feel like we're getting something that's valuable and giving something away that's valuable, and trying to do the prudential analysis to know what should we do is an ongoing discussion.
Thank you. Brian.
Yeah, as somebody in higher education, and anybody is in education kind of hands-on on a daily basis, you know the struggle we're all having right now with AI. If you teach university students, you know it's just almost a given that they're going to be using AI to generate papers or something like that. But I'm reminded of the Canadian philosopher George Grant, one of our greatest thinkers on technology from the 60s, 70s, 80s. He opens his book, Technology and Justice, maybe, with this line. He says, he quotes this Spanish proverb. He says, where God says, take what you want, God says, take it and pay for it. And then he says, we don't know what the cost is going to be of new technology. I mean, it's a little bit like the American healthcare system, right? Where you go in for a treatment or you go in for something, you have no idea what it's going to cost you, but you do it anyway. But with right? But with new technologies like this, with AI, we're grabbing it and we're using it. We don't know what the cost is. I mean, I got into education in the late 90s because I was reading deeply in Heidegger and Lowell and George Grant and Borgman on technology. And I thought even in the late 90s, I want to be part of a resistance movement against the enframing of our teenagers and our citizens' lives by technology. And you know, that was almost 30 years ago now, before the smartphone even. And, you know, the introduction of cell phones, you thought, oh, well, at least we'll know where our kids are. They can call us when they need.
Yeah.
Okay, well, take it and pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
And then smartphones come along, 2007. And if you look at any study at the National Institute, you know, of mental health, like just the rise of depression and anomie and acedia and self-harm since the introduction of the smartphone. So, yeah, it's a great tool, but take it and pay for it. And I think the danger for me is simply we don't know what the cost is going to be for some of these. So when it comes to, well, I mean, I guess we can guess what some of the cost is. You know, education, when we use AI in education, I think we wrench education from what I might call the economy of beatitude into the economy of production, where we act like what we care about in education is the production of some artifact, whether it's an essay or a presentation or something like that. But my school, my university recently looked into an AI program that would automatically grade student essays, which to my mind had been generated by AI in the first place. And at that point in time, you just wonder, what are we doing? Right. But that pretends that education is about that what we care about as educators is the production of the essay, or the essay itself, the artifact. We don't actually care about the essay that they're handing in. I mean, I don't need to read one more mediocre paper on, you know, Aristotle or Plato or Homer or something like that, right? The point is not that they have something to hand in. That would be the economy of production. But we've sold them that in part because we've also told them the end of education is a grade and the accumulated GPA. And how you get that is having something to produce, and that what we care about is you check the boxes and turn in a product, and then we pay you in grades. And I won't go off on that because I've done that elsewhere. But I think we've sold them that line, as opposed to thinking, no, the telos of education is your formation. So every assignment, every exercise, every paper is an opportunity or an invitation for you to form your own judgment, your own intellectual and moral prudence, for you to gain understanding. And the use of AI in education undercuts all of that. But it's no surprise that our students are using it because we have not explained to them what we're doing in our academic institutions, and our systems have been set up to make them rational users. I mean, if what we care about is receiving something from them, then it only makes sense to produce that thing in the most efficient way possible. As if the university, though, is like an essay producing business, right? That's what it acts like, but it's not. It's a people producing business, if you will. We care about the integrated formation of the people, not the mediocre artifacts they're handing in for a grade. And so we're struggling with that. And of course, my larger university wants us to incorporate it in all of our courses, but at Templeton, we've really put a stake in the ground and said, no, we're not. And if you use it, you'll fail the class and might be invited to leave the honors college. Through academic dishonesty. Now that said, I do think, and then I'll pass it on to Erin, when it's not in the context where the goal is formation of the human person, then it does make sense to use it for some things. My brother works for a major international marketing and advertising agency, and they use it all the time because they're not interested in the formation of their employees to figure out how to develop a marketing campaign. They want the marketing campaign. Or Jolie Hodge and I were in Australia last month, and we had 4 hours in Sydney. So we asked AI, we had 4 hours in Sydney. Here's where we are. What can we see and in what order? Great. That seems like a fine use. Or a friend of mine who's a theoretical physicist at Oxford working on cancer treatment at kind of molecular level. He's using it to do computational, things that he couldn't do himself. That to me seems like an appropriate use of it, but not when it replaces exercises and opportunities aimed at formation, which is what we're all about in this room, I think. So, sorry, over to you, Erin.
Thank you. I think the way I'm seeing it, that I'll just bring into focus here, and I work in public policy a little bit, as well as working in academics. So I'll kind of bridge those two things. A young person brought this to me because she's been doing some student teaching in a school that uses AI for its primary instruction mode. And she said something to me that I thought should provoke all of us, and it touches on something Brian mentioned. She said, well, what if AI is better at teaching people things than humans? What if it produces better test results? And I think that's relevant here, sitting in a room about testing. What if it's better at tutoring students to do better in tests? And you actually learn more. Why would we allow anyone to do anything else? And that allow piece is the public policy piece that I want to talk about. I think that the coming battle over this is going to be, it's going to make all the other culture war things that we've dealt with in the past, I don't know, however many decades, look kind of small by comparison. And it's going to come down to the use of AI, I think, primarily in education. That's where the rubber's going to really meet the road. And I see two possible paths here. I think the one path will be what we've already seen in terms of the parent reaction to technology post-pandemic. So, the bans on cell phones have passed in red states, blue states, and purple states. They're broadly popular. And so you see a sort of grassroots resistance to technology in schools. And I think that there probably will be additional efforts pass even more restrictive laws on that in the next legislative cycle. That's one piece. The other piece is that there are a lot of companies that see a lot of money to be made from public school districts, and I want to emphasize the difference here between the private sector and the public sector, but public school districts in terms of selling them technology. We saw this when it first time around with the one-to-one technology movement in the early 2010s. Chris probably remembers this well, where businesses were trying to sell schools on the idea that every student needed their own device. Well, we saw what happened with that, right? Like that didn't pan out the way everybody thought it would. And so you're going to see a similar sort of gold rush towards being vendors in the states. And the states are vulnerable to this because
because they just generally are kind of. So the thing that I want to draw the distinction between is something that I think Brian's already kind of touched on, which is what do we mean, and Chris too, what do we mean when we're talking about AI? So on the one hand, AI has enormous potential, frankly, for cost savings, especially in large bureaucracies.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm going to say it, like there's tons of waste, and AI could really help drive that down. And that should be something that we all care about as stewards of public, funds. That should be something that matters to us. So on the one hand, I think AI is not always one thing, right? And so a blanket ban, let's say, on AI in education, period, might be unwise because you might inadvertently ban it from like making the school district's buses run on a better schedule or something like that, right? Like,
That's right.
on the other hand, you would want some sort of thought put into, is this a way, is there a way in which this technology is going to impinge upon the instructional periods for students? And so that's going to be a distinction that, you really have to be careful with looking at legislation and drawing your position on those things. So it's just something to throw out there. The broader point is that I think AI could be useful in instruction and education if you think about the different kinds of education and the different subjects that you're teaching. So I think in STEM, for instance, there might be some potential, especially if you're talking about AI useful in terms of drilling on math facts. Okay, let's just use math facts as an example. When I was a kid, math facts, my mom had a timer. She made me recite them. Like that was it. It took me, 5 minutes a day, and then I could go play. You could see AI being built in a way that was responsive and taught you your math facts. You could also see AI, and this is coming from someone who is a former language person, a language instructor, used to help you drill on your Latin stuff. And you could see it teaching you Latin and Greek a little bit faster than the way we can do it now, because it's always patient, it's not a human, and it can help correct you in the moment when you've made a mistake. You could train an LLM on the corpus of Latin and Greek literature, and you can imagine the possibilities of that, being able to interact with that corpus, or even an individual author, so to speak. So I think there are interesting applications depending on what you're using it for. Especially if the end of that goal is to say, you've learned this body of facts, now set that aside. You're coming into class to interact with authentic texts and authentic humans and have conversations in the target language, for instance, or to solve actual math problems in person together. So I'm just saying, I think we can have discussions about this that aren't all one thing or all the other thing. We need to think about what the ends are, and we need to think about what we mean when we say AI before we make a sort of blanket condemnation one way or the other.
Thank you. That's a wonderful way to get started. So the next question is going to build on these, because I think a theme that came up in all of them is, what is the telos of education, and what is the distinction between education as perhaps information versus education as formation. And so I want to dig a little more into that distinction, particularly within this framework of classical education. And so I want to do that by kind of asking a couple, painting a picture for you of a couple, an ancient model of education, and then a kind of new AI model of education to help us think through education as formation versus, training or information or so on. So I'm thinking back to Socrates in the Phaedrus and his concerns about writing, as a new technology, right? And so there's this proposal, wow, these Egyptians are pretty smart. They got this newfangled thing. This is going to make all your leaders the smartest people. You got to get on board with this writing thing, right? Socrates, a little concerned, right? I have the sense, he says, I'm paraphrasing here. I have the sense that with this writing, people will think they know, but they won't really know. They're going to have, kind of a simulacrum. That wasn't his word. A simulacrum of knowledge, but they're not really going to know. And then also these words, once they're on, the paper or the parchment, they become like orphans, no one to defend them. They can be twisted and turned anyway. There's no one there guiding this process, right? What we're trying to do with education, I think he was getting at, is it's this kind of shaping of the soul, right? And we can't let the writing is not going to shape the souls the way that having this flesh and blood living person to do that molding does. And so that's a, kind of an ancient model that I'm wondering, on the other side of that, if we hadn't had Plato, maybe we wouldn't be talking about Socrates.
We're
So,
glad he thought differently.
right. So I think we could certainly say that we might have lost some things in the transition to writing, the building up of memory, and in a way perhaps that we don't build up memory the same way now. But probably arguably we've gained quite a lot. And so I'm interested in kind of using that as a filter for thinking through AI. And we've already started to kind of get toward that, but to try to dig down into Brian, you talk about the cost. As we think about the cost, how do we, if we are going to use any aspects of AI, make use of it in a way that doesn't bring about, the kinds of dire consequences, say, that Socrates had? So that's the first part of it. But now I'm going to paint you a picture with a contemporary example. All right. So you may have heard talk of the Alpha School. It's been getting a lot of press everywhere, right? So the basic model is, I think they talk about, 2 hours of instruction with AI. They do not hire teachers, they hire what they call guides. And so all the material is, uploaded in this AI, and the child works with this AI material to learn it. And then they use the afternoon to do, whatever they would like to pursue. And the guides, the flesh and blood guides, kind of help and inspire them and cheer them on. Okay, so it's a new model. Now, stay with me. Now,
Enter another query. One more prompt.
so I am wondering, there's a part of this, as I listen to the Alpha School folks, what's interesting, their justifications, they say, this is one-to-one, like you were saying, Erin. This is tailored to the student, kind of an individual tutor. And I'm thinking, as a former homeschooler, it sounds a lot like what I used to do at home, one-to-one, tailored to the student, kind of a no-brainer that if you can tailor one-to-one, it's going to be a really good thing. But what if it does turn out, as Erin says, that, in classical schools, the Latin is better for the students who are getting the AI tutoring? And then they can go on to read Virgil much better than they could have before. I don't know. And so could we perhaps have this kind of AI-inspired classical education on this Alpha School model? Would we gain quite a bit? And would it be too backward-looking to say, let's not do that? So those are my kind of inter-threaded questions.
Can you say that again? No.
All right, Brian, behave.
ChatGPT, summarize what Dr. Parham.
Anywhere you want to enter in there.
Can I take a stab at that? Because Alpha School is one of the schools that participates in our rotation, and
I don't know these schools,
I'm attached to them, and they're
Perfect.
in Austin. I'm not attached in like an official way. It's just they're part of our student rotation, so I'll just speak to that. So I think there are definite pluses and minuses to the approach. I think that we have to be very careful when we think about what it means to put a student in front of a screen for 2 hours. I think we've seen downsides to that. Now, I want to say something that might be controversial to this room. I know a lot of homeschoolers. I was homeschooled. A lot of homeschoolers do that. They do their homeschooling primarily through online courses and online tutoring. Okay. So I don't know how you guys feel about that. I'm okay with parents choosing that if that's what they want to do. Okay. So there are definitely there are nuances here. I think the problem fundamentally for me is the idea that you can boil down every kind of every subject, not just like the rote memorization pieces, but every subject into 2 hours of compressed learning, and then that's it. That's all you're doing. So that to me is the problem. Not to say that using it occasionally for certain targeted applications or certain targeted subjects might not be a problem, but to say everything all at once in 2 hours, we're going to learn everything you need to know, that to me seems to be more problematic than the idea of using it occasionally for targeted applications. So I don't know if that answers my question.
You're making me think about how this AI technology the tool tends to lead us to become centrifugal
Yeah.
in our approach. And there's a place for diverging and going wide. But the trouble with AI is that you can just keep going wider and wider and wider, and it contradicts contemplation,
Right.
which is one of the virtues of human education, is we need to learn how to meditate, contemplate, and therefore to love. So you can't love something until you begin to contemplate it and linger over it. To be possessed by something, and I think this was Socrates' concern, is that if we have the words on a page, I don't have to really pay attention anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So where goes attention, which is this reaching out to possess something and to be possessed by it? A.G. Sertalange in his book, The Intellectual Life, says that every academic work begins with a moment of ecstasy. And he's using that a Greek word in its literal sense of being lifted up and out of something that would otherwise hold you, to ascend, as it were, to something heavenly and to know it. And that involves love. When that happens, there is love. And so when there is a love for something true, good, and beautiful, you are now attending, and you're becoming centripetal rather than centrifugal. You're coming into something, and that thing is coming into you, and now you're not just reading, but you're being read. And so I think the technology, while it's powerful, it tends to lead us away from contemplation. And how can virtue be formed in a person if they're just constantly exploring, going wide, way leading on to way, leading on to way, leading on to way? It can be kind of exhilarating, but it doesn't cultivate wisdom.
They're not really doing the exploring.
In one sense, they're not.
I mean, it's the AI doing the exploring for them, right? I mean, when you say
well,
that,
they have
what do we mean?
they have a very explicit curriculum of tests that the students have to pass. So there are benchmarks that are academic benchmarks, and they look like, I mean, any other academic benchmarks. It's just they're using the AI as a tutor to get them to that point. So, you know, you do this lesson, you take this test, then you do another lesson, you take another test. By the way, this method of mastery education was in wide use in the 1970s. A lot of people who transitioned to homeschooling in the 70s and 80s use these correspondence courses. This is actually not a new thing. It's just more adaptive in the age of AI. So you can feel however you want to feel about that, but this is kind of it's an educational philosophy that's sort of baked into the technologies.
Yeah, I don't know this model of school. I don't know these alpha schools. So I'm kind of commenting more broadly, I think, than just the use of AI.
I think the point that I really agree with is that contemplative piece, though.
The what, please?
The contemplative piece.
Yeah, it seems like, to come back to that George Grant quote, take what you want, take it and pay for it. I mean, with writing, yeah, we adopted that technology, and there is something lost. I mean, our memories are not what, you know, they perhaps were. Obviously, in the Middle Ages, we don't know how to develop them, how to cultivate them. You know, but we take those kind of risks all the time. I mean, if the speed limit throughout the country was 30 miles an hour, traffic deaths would plummet. We know that. But we take that risk. We want to drive faster. We want the economy. We want, goods to move more quickly. And so we take that risk. We take it and we pay for it in that context in human lives. But we take that risk as a society. It seems like with the use of AI and technology in education, is that it's similar. It's a big risk. And we don't know what the cost will be. And part of the cost is the formation of our students and their ability not just to acquire knowledge or information they can use to pass a test, but discernment, discretion, the practice, the habits, the focal practices of contemplation, of attentiveness, of quiet, of struggle, which is really where you develop what I would call intellectual prudence and the kinds of intellectual skills and verbal skills, mathematical skills we care about. And it shortcuts all of that to such a significant degree at such risk that I think we have to, as we utilize it, very, very cautiously in very kind of select ways, because we're talking about the formation of human persons here. My neighbors, my future legislators, my future teachers or whatever. We're talking about their formation. And I think we want to be very, very careful not knowing what the cost is going to be.
So I'm thinking about this. Both of your comments make me think about this matter of trust, because if a human is forming another human, you're trusting that I'm going to be discipled by and led by somebody. I will become like my teacher, as Christ says in Luke 6. In other words, if you're my agent, and I trust you, I want to be like you, and I will become like you if you teach me. But with agentic AI, we're trusting what are we trusting? What is that image that we're being conformed to? Who controls that? So when you ask ChatGPT to teach you anything, to generate anything, can you trust the results? It might seem good, especially if you're 16 years old. Oh, this is what I got back. This must be good. But can you trust it? And you've heard about AI slop. This is AI basically recycling AI, and it just diminishes whatever it is. Or hallucinations, but even if it's working well, is that what? If you use the word master, well, who's the master? It's not clear who it is. It's not clear what the authority is, and it seems like then we're trusting something very nebulous, and especially for young people, it's a problem.
Well, and I mean, just on that point, like you're right. A year ago, I was trying to use it to do some research into George MacDonald's mentor, A.J. Scott, and have it search stuff. And it was hallucinating all the time. It was just confusing people. It was making up quotes as we know it used to do. But in the last 12 months, it's gotten astonishingly good and better. So it is much more trustworthy with the results, because like you, I've tested it and it gives me kind of book, chapter, verse in 6 languages for what I'm looking for. But I think that's not what we really care about, like getting the accurate information with respect to education. Is it? I mean, we care. I sometimes tell my students, I'm just giving you 4 years of practicing the way I hope you live the rest of your life, right? Asking big questions, reading great texts, having, conversations with good friends about complex things. But where does AI fit in that way of living? I mean, sometimes we talk about not just teaching the classical tradition and classical methods, but a classical way of living and being in the world. And that doesn't come about through engaging with an LLM. It can teach me, it can tell me stuff. I can learn stuff from it to be sure, but it doesn't help me practice a way of living that's sustainable over the course of my life in a deeply human, flourishing way.
Can I jump in on that? Yeah. I think you're right I think we agree broadly. I want to ask, though, the question of why do we study Latin and Greek? And we're classical educators. I'm just going to ask the question, why do we do it? For the sake of the struggle, so kids have to memorize a bunch of endings? Is that why we do it? So that they can struggle through it and hate Latin in 5 years? Or do we do it so that they can read?
They hate it in 1. What do you mean 5?
This is a problem. This is a problem. I'm just going to call it out, okay? Or do we do it so they can read St. Augustine and pick up the book and read it, right? That's St. Augustine. Pick it up and read it, okay? That's why we do it, and so they can have rich conversations in class about St. Augustine, about the target text. You know, it would be even better if they were having those conversations in Latin. And you know what? They used to. In the Renaissance period, they did. We don't do that anymore because our kids are not immersed in those languages. Now, we may not be able to get to the immersion stage because it's just too resource intensive. We can't do that. You know what could accelerate that? LLMs that teach you Latin quickly because they are adapted and can speak to you in St. Augustine's dialect, okay? Now, I'm saying that to be controversial. I want to stir conversation here. But if the goal is learn your basics, come to class. It's a Faraday cage. No more technology here. We're going to talk about St. Augustine in his language and have debates in his language. Is that not getting back to the Renaissance? It's actually closer to what we want as classical educators. So I'm simply suggesting that there are good uses. We have to start with the end in mind. What is the end? The end is those conversations you're talking about.
That's right.
A richer life.
Yeah, and I mean, but the use of AI there is still the telos is the formation of the
Correct.
students.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah,
Telos is
absolutely.
all that matters. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
can I ask?
Oh yeah.
No, I was going to say, so I agree that telos is what matters, but my question / concern is one about human frailty and susceptibility. All right. So I see everything that you're saying, Erin, and it makes a lot of sense to me. But then I'm thinking about, kind of listening to, say, two different kinds of songs. So as I've thought more about AI, I've thought about, where people are going to AI increasingly to get their ideas, to get their inspiration, and so on. I know that's not what you're talking about, but just 1 second. Because I suspect it may be hard to keep the thing right where you want it. And so whereas in the past, say poets would have said, sing o muse, and you would be listening to the muse, and the muse would help you to create something extraordinary. Now it's sing o AI. AI, what should I write about? What is the, and I'm wondering if AI, depending on how we use it, but even if we're trying to use it well, is there a possibility that it becomes more like the siren song? Right. So this is my song theme. So they sing something, it sounds so good, but it is luring you in ways that you don't expect. And so my question / concern is we want to use it in all of these really good ways, but it becomes, students are very wily. They get around the edges and the locks. They find a way. And I am just wondering, to what extent can it be possible to keep students on a track where they're getting the best parts of AI tools and not being lured to the shoals? That's my question. And I don't know. I don't have an answer. I see all the benefits, but I am just wondering how you keep them off the shoals.
Can I introduce one distinction that I think will help the conversation? I think when you encounter a ChatGPT prompt, what ChatGPT is apparently trying to do is create a master app where this one prompt that will allow you to go anywhere. And that's where it becomes discursive and distracting, and it's like it's the Swiss Army knife. It's everything in one prompt. So even if you can use it to do some Latin work, but you can also use it now to create pornography. That just came out a couple of days ago that Altman has said they're going to allow an adult use of its image creation. And this is almost like enough for me to just quit. Like, really? Yeah, they're going to be able to distinguish whether it's a 15-year-old using this app. So
They've been so effective at
Yeah,
that in the
right.
past, haven't they?
Right.
Are you 18? Yes.
you gotta
Okay,
be
then
18,
come
yeah.
on in.
But to Erin's point, you can control AI. Like when you text on your iPhone, your AI is being used to predict the next word and correct your spellings, right? And so it's very contained. It's very focused on predicting the next word and doing spelling. That's a very contained use of AI. So if you can take the AI technology and really constrain it, you might be able to prevent the siren songs from being heard, because this is just a Latin app. That's all it does. So that's just another example of how AI can be so many different things.
I think that's what I'm getting at when I said an LLM. Like in theory, it's a completely closed loop. You just feed your LLM. The only corpus that you feed it is Latin and Greek that's existent, right? And then you would hire an army of classicists to clean it up and make it usable and to turn it into something that you could turn into a dialogue sort of. So I'm only suggesting a closed universe in that case.
And with ChatGPT, you can create your own GPT and do something like
Right.
that right now. You can upload documents to your own little
Right.
private library.
Yeah.
So that's of course very powerful.
Yeah.
But then you have to be disciplined. Like when you open up your
Well,
ChatGPT,
Right.
is that what you're going to do, or are you
I
going
would,
to be tempted?
yeah. I mean, this is all. It was really a thought experiment more than a proposal. I'm simply saying I think there are plenty of ways you can gate those things that are
Right.
like you don't have to give it the ChatGPT app. It can be a different app, and then it's a closed universe. So I'm completely with you. I'm extremely alarmed by these general model things. I think we should keep kids as far away from those as possible, just to be clear. So, yeah.
Angel, it strikes me as I hear your question. You know, I work in ethics is my background and formation of, you know, virtue formation. And it's interesting, you're describing temperance, Chris. I mean, that's the virtue that you need with respect to AI. And it's very interesting that Aristotle in the Communicating Ethics 4 times says that young people cannot learn prudence because they're driven by their passions and they don't have enough experience. Well, like contemporary neuroscience, we know that the prefrontal cortex, the process of myelination, all of these processes that regulate our behavior regulating processes in our brain aren't fully formed until they're 28. Only people that really get this are car rental companies who won't rent you a car until you're 25, right? Everybody else seems to miss this. I mean, you can't buy alcohol until you're 21 or present until you're 35. But I mean, that just seems to be built on the same observation that Aristotle made and now that our contemporary neuroscientists
And men are the slowest to mature.
make. Yes, we are. You've come along nicely, though. I have to say. So, I mean, Angel, I guess it makes me wonder, is there like for educators, is there a kind of age limit here with like open access to open AI, if you will, that we recognize that you actually don't have the ability to stop, to turn it off. I mean, this is where like my brother a long time ago when he got into online marketing and stuff like that, I mean, they would, as we all know, you know, they would hire psychologists to figure out how do we keep people on the app longer. Right. I mean, so it's not that they're neutral tools. They are designed to be used. They are for-profit businesses, billions of dollars of business. They need our 6th graders to be on AI because they want to sell the schools on this say, oh, your student is ever going to get a job if they don't start developing, you know, their AI skills when they're 10. But I think both Aristotle and contemporary neuroscientists would say that's crazy because students operate in the language, in the literature, sometimes we call it hot cognition versus cold cognition. Like when you're in the moment, you're going to use it. You can't stop. As anybody who has an 18-year-old son, you know, like I do, knows once they start down that rabbit trail of whatever happens to be online, and you're like, hey, what have you been doing the last 6 hours? Oh, you haven't moved. And so I'm wondering, like in that respect, like students in that what we call emerging adult, that time period from like 16 to 25, like the temperance is unbelievably hard to develop. Prudence is unbelievably hard to develop. They are kind of anatomically wired to like not have it. So is there kind of an age limit on some of these kind of things? If it's a targeted app like you're describing, I don't know that those exist yet. I can imagine them, of course, right? That's one thing, but to just like an open use of it, I think students actually can't control it. I mean, it's hard enough for any of us to control our use of the cell phone, but we're all, you know, mature adults for the most part, let alone my 6-year-old or 16-year-old.
I would strongly agree. I don't think open use of AI has a whole lot of good coming out of it at the moment.
But that's what, you know, even my university students are being told that by the AI, you know.
Well, they're being given free subscriptions.
Well, free subscriptions, and they're being told your employers want you to have to know how to AI. But this is like when my 10-year-old was given an iPad in school because they needed to learn how to use technology. I was like, my 2-year-old knows how to use an iPad.
Can I share an insight from the chief economist of Indeed.com? We were meeting with her because we're doing some research on the impact of AI on the workforce specifically, and they have data on this. So I'll just throw this out there. And this is not, we haven't finished the research. This is preliminary. Please don't quote me, et cetera. But the thing that she mentioned that I found extremely interesting was that they're not finding a huge number or huge increase in their data is based on job descriptions, right?
Yeah.
They're just not finding a lot of employers putting AI in the job descriptions. And I said, well, explain that to me. Do you have a hypothesis about why this is the case? Because I'm told that it's disrupting the workforce. And she's like, we don't know yet.
Yeah.
We don't know why this is. We think it might be disrupting some entry-level positions, but we don't know. So I think we all need to be very cautious
Yep.
about marketing and the hype, because there's been hype before, there's hype now, there's truth in some of it, and there's falsity in some of it. And so maybe just be discerning when you hear claims, because maybe they're not as grounded in facts as you might think they are. And it's really hard to get to the core truth of this, by the way.
Well, and
So,
it's going to be domain specific, isn't it? I
Exactly.
mean, if you're in engineering, if
Yeah.
you're in data science, and
Yeah.
if you're in some of these kind of things,
actually, even in those fields, it's not mentioned.
but not yet.
So, yeah,
I
not
think
yet.
it's simply a
Could
not
be,
yet,
could be coming.
That's
Yeah.
right. I think
Yeah.
it's definitely coming in some of those fields. On the other hand, the use of AI, the skills to use AI, I don't think are that difficult.
They're not. And that's my hypothesis
and
about
so
this.
do I need to come in with that, or why do you
My
just like do a little job
hypothesis
training?
is, I asked her, I said, well, is this because everybody just assumes that you can just pick up AI and use it? You don't need any special skills for it? I'm throwing out there, guys, it's like the iPad. Remember when people said we need kids to learn these technologies and we need one-to-one so they'll be fluent in technology? Guess what? Any kid can teach you any technology better than you can teach it to them. It's just the truth. And that applies to AI too. So this idea that we need everybody to be AI literate by the time they go to work, guess what? They're already either going to acquire it on their own time, or it's actually the whole point of AI is that it's frictionless and it's actually pretty easy to pick up. So just throwing that out there.
So let me ask this, because what keeps coming up, is what are employers going to want, that kind of thing. And of course, we need to think about that. But here's it's another question, and we're in this transition period, and what you're saying, Erin, is very helpful. We're not seeing that in the job descriptions. We don't know the direction it's going to go necessarily. But it seems to me that there's a larger question about, especially when we're talking about our children, K to 12 age, what are we willing to give them over to or not in order to get a job, right?
Right.
You know, I, I wonder what things will look like 50 years from now. Technologically, they look very different than they did 5 years ago, let alone 50 years from now. And this is where I do wonder, as classical educators, if there might be a kind of prophetic work that we are engaged in that attempts to see beyond and not bow down to kind of what all the urgency seems to be. And it's a very delicate balance. Like, what is that balance between, okay, everyone may be saying that you have to do it this way, that you've got to give into the technology. How do we, or can we, walk, a very delicate balance, a very delicate line of saying, I draw this line in terms of what I'm willing to give my children over to. And that may mean, getting back to the costs, Brian, that may mean we may pay a certain cost in the job market, or let's just bring it back to college admissions, because there's this very, what if it is the case that the people who are using, the students who are using AI, are doing better on all the college entry exams, or they're doing better, getting better grades, or whatever it might be. At what point do we say, okay, but we are concerned about formation and virtue, and we are going to hold the line on that, and there may be some other kind of cost. But on the other hand, do we want to throw our children into this particular kind of rat race with, kind of techno fundamentalism? And that's not an easy question to answer, especially for me as a parent. I have a daughter who's second year at UVA studying classics, right? So I haven't pushed her into the commerce school, which is where everyone's trying to get into, So professors are not lots of money. I've got something for her to fall back on, if the classics thing doesn't pan out. but there's a certain amount of faith I have that this is an important, enriching area of study. She's been interested in academia. Can't tell you what that job market is like these days. Um, but if I were to say, you know what, maybe you should, go to the comm school, like there's a part of me that's like, we're just going to have to pay whatever that price is and have a little bit of faith. I wonder what that looks like for classical educators in terms of navigating the waters of AI, what we're willing to take, what we're not willing to take, to what extent we're willing to be driven by the market. Um, and I suspect it would mean cultivating some alternative um, frameworks, opportunities, job markets, entrepreneurial pursuits, because thinking as a sociologist, there are social structures are real, right? Social structural foundations will railroad you one way versus another way. And if you don't have the alternatives, then people get carried along by, kind of what the society has already structured. So that's not a pro or anti AI. It's a question about, what prices are we willing to pay on what end as we think about this as educators?
Well, and just because so many people here are involved in K-12 education, it's there. One question, Angel, is what price are we willing to pay generally, but what price are our parents who pay their kids' tuition willing to pay?
Exactly.
And some of this is framing for them too. How do we help them
That's right.
understand and accept the kind of cost you've just alluded to there? And I think that's a challenge.
It's not very easy.
It's not.
Yet it's just restating what you've said, but a prudential, proportionate response is what we need. But what is that in this particular moment? What does that mean? Because I think there's a hierarchy of teloi. We want the fully formed, virtuous human being, and I don't think we should compromise on that. Is there a way of incorporating various technologies along the way that would be prudent and proportionate? I think so. And I think this is going to be an ongoing, therefore, discussion. I think removing smartphones from the classroom was an important prudential step.
What were they there in the first place for? I mean, that shouldn't have taken us like 15 years and Jonathan Haidt's multiple volumes to figure out.
But we might be saying the same thing about
mind-boggling.
We might be saying the same thing about ChatGPT 5 years from now. Why did we ever let any kid have that app on?
Oh, well, that's why that's the take what you want and pay for it. I mean, that's with like smartphones in 2007, and then there's a spike within 5-10 years of self-harm and suicide and depression rates. I mean, all of Haidt's work is because we didn't think prudentially about the introduction of this new technology into the hands and lives of adolescents. But here we do have them. We do have a moment. I mean, but again, at like my university, I'm sure UVA too, it's like full steam ahead on this new technology, and not a whole lot of people saying, there are committees talking about it.
Sure.
While other departments hit the throttle,
I mean, I have colleagues who just give assignments that are AI based, and they're not the contained LLMs, right? It's the whole Chat GPT everything. And in my department meetings, it's been very clear that I'm in the minority with my medieval, pedagogies, which will be
same. My counterparts at Villanova and UPenn, we've gotten together several times. I mean, these are Villanova and UPenn, it's one of the Ivy Leagues, and he is a medieval outlier. This counterpart down at UPenn with this, but I think for us in classical education, we have an opportunity to do something different, to be a kind of resistance movement. We do all kinds of weird things anyway, right? Like Latin for our second graders. So to think that we're going to do something different here as a kind of witness, and witnessing being, yes, you could be a martyr, and so we can go that way. But there is you don't know the impact of that witness, in the future. But to say, no, this is what we care about, and we're going to prudentially be a kind of model here,
This gets to a question that I wanted to ask. See how we're doing on time. I wanted to leave just a little bit of time for questions, but one of my questions is really on this. As classical educators, what do we have to offer the world right now in terms of witness, resistance? So I made reference to medieval pedagogies. Um, it's been a lot of fun with my students that I'm teaching right now. We were reading Aquinas and talking about the disputation method. I've had them do that method before. I have them keep commonplace books. Um, I have been trying to get back to paper packs so that they're forced to like actually engage with a physical text, and so those are the directions that I'm trying to go with them. But I have this sense that the world has something to learn from those of us who are stubborn that could be really life-giving. And so I'm wondering, thinking as classical educators, not in a spirit of, kind of berating people or talking down condescendingly to them at all, but in a sense of saying, here's, something that seemed to have died out a long time ago, but we think is a jewel, and just gently want to introduce you to the possibility of this. And of course, people will do whatever they want to, but what do we have to offer that might be of use?
Can I just jump in very quickly here? I'm doing a little bit of research on the history of compulsory education, and I just want to flag that you're exactly onto something. Phonics instruction is an example here. It was part of the reading wars going back to Horace Mann and Noah Webster, right? So this has actually been a rift in American education for a very long time, and it's flared up at different points. In the 70s, it was taken up by Phyllis Schlafly. It was an explicitly culture war issue that was brought up by the religious right, who fought very hard for phonics because they wanted students to be able to actually read things like the Bible. And so it was a fundy coded thing. Okay. I know this because my parents were in the middle of all of it, and so I have all the documentation. It's very interesting. So the point being that they were right. All these weirdos who were coded as rubes were right. There was a whole podcast series that came out, and all of a sudden, all the best and brightest came around to the idea phonics is the best way to teach. And guess what? Blue states, red states, purple states have now passed these laws. Is there a theme emerging here? Cell phone bans and phonics. Those are kind of things we own in this room. We should own those things. So there are areas, exactly what you're talking about, maybe having a little bit less of a rapid adoption of AI, or maybe using it only for specific things, or saying no AI at all, or whatever it might be for your particular community, right? That can serve as a natural experiment, to use a term in social science, to say, here are all these schools over here that are kind of taking a little bit of a slower approach or a more cautious approach. Here are all these individuals that are racing towards it. Like, maybe we could test their life outcomes in 5 or 10 years and see how they're doing, not just on their test scores, but hey, are they happily married? Do they participate in their community? Do they vote? Those kinds of things. So yes, of course there should be a natural experiment. This is a country where we like those kinds of things. So I think I'm with you on that completely. So keep being weird, I guess. Yeah.
Wow. And we've got a natural constituency right here.
Yeah. So
I think that's right. And there's some thoughtful people within this renewal writing about this. But Justin Early comes to mind, who is a dad at the Veritas School in Richmond. He's written The Common Rule and then Habits of the Household, just reflecting on these matters and giving a counsel to parents and families that I think is prudential. And one of his rules is scripture first, and don't go to bed with your iPhone. Charge it in another room. Put the phones in a basket when you have dinner. Just to establish practices that allow for the human. And I think that would apply, therefore, to our schools. How do we ensure that what Brian was articulating as the telos of a classical education is guarded and protected? And then I think the distinction between contained AI and general AI is really important. That master app, I think, is problematic for students. It's probably problematic for most of us as adults. When I use ChatGPT, I try to contain myself, but it's hard. But isn't this analogous to the internet generally? So I think a lot of the people who would say don't use AI, the arguments I've heard would apply to the internet. and yet everyone's using the internet. So I think it's somehow it's an extension maybe of the printing press as a revolution in information technology, and then the internet generally, like Google and now AI. So I think prudence is right, and then I think what Erin said about maybe the operational uses of AI, like the back end of the school. Our company uses Ramp as an accounting tool. Raise your hand if you happen to know what Ramp is and use it. It's a very helpful. It has saved our company loads and hours of time. And it's just a way of syncing up your receipts and your expenses with your accounting software. It does it all automatically. When you get the email that comes in, it tracks it. I don't have to touch. I don't do any reconciliation anymore. And so that I think is a good use that I applaud. I like the fact that our military uses AI to shoot down missiles. I like that. I want that.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I want a 16-year-old having ChatGPT on his phone.
To shoot down missiles? No, that seems like a bad idea. We should ban that.
You might think he could.
Yeah. Angel, and I think that's what I'm trying to get at with this idea of being witnesses to something good. My counterpart, this friend down at UPenn that I mentioned, very politically, socially liberal guy, not a believer, but in our back and forth, he's like, this is going to force us to really rethink the ends of education and what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I said, well, yeah, because for ages now, we've said the end of education is kind of overpriced job training for gainful employment, or it's for the political formation of a certain kind of citizen, or it's to produce disciplinary specialists, for the research university. And he's like, oh, this is changing all of that. We have to really rethink what we're doing. And then, and then he's a very bright guy. He's like, where do we have models for this? And I said, oh, well, have a seat. But I just said, well, this is what we do in classical education. I have been doing for a long time. And one of the reasons classical education began, is in the 80s or whenever with Care Paravel and other kind of schools, is to say, what are the ends of education that we're pursuing? And this idea of integrated holistic formation of the human person is a kind of witness that I think our educational institutions need. And part of that, Templeton has been privileged the last couple of years to run the intellectual retreats for First Things up in New York. And I just see Mark Bowerline over here. And our last one was on technology, faith and technology or something like that. And one of the readings I really wanted in there for this year's reader was Albert Borgman, who is a University of Montana professor of technology. I think he recently passed away, but in the 80s and 90s. And he has this concept that I found so useful in the late 90s of focal things and focal practices that keep our lives from being inframed by technology. And he just points out really quickly that the Latin word for hearth is the hearth for focus. Focus means hearth, and it's what you focus on, what you attend to. And so he says we need to develop focal practices that keep our lives from being inframed by technology. And focal practices are like reading an actual book, having a dinner party with actual friends, going for a walk in the woods, learning an instrument. And he's like, the focal thing is the guitar. The focal thing is the book. The focal practices are the lives that we build around them. And he says, these have to become practices so they're not simply episodic, haphazard. Like when you have that great dinner party at the Perrins and you think, gosh, that was great. And it never happens again, though you guys have turned that into a focal practice. But to say we have to build these kind of practices in, and I think Aristotle teaches, if nothing else, that we have to help our students build these practices into their lives so their lives are not inframed by technology, but are oriented towards, if you will, the true, good, beautiful, and holy, which are embodied in some of these focal things and focal practices. And I think that's something that we have to offer.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Well, I'd like to have a few minutes if there are any questions from the floor. Yes.
I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts. So, working on innovations right now and getting applications that are supposed to help hear students talk about themselves, right? Get in touch with themselves. The easy ones are the bad ones. They just put the prompt in and it's clearly AI and like
make me look more interesting than I am. Yeah. Yeah.
I realize the ones that are almost indecipherable now are the ones where they're actually like, yeah, what am I? I'm like, here's how I disagree in ChatGPT. They're working with ChatGPT to figure out like, well, tell me about 3 disagreements you've had. Then I'll write an essay for you about what you learned when they're starting to have that conversation. I suspect that, back to what Brian said, but the artifact might look exactly the same at the end of the day, as if they would have had those same conversations with friends or family members or people who actually knew them versus this new acquaintance. What do you think about how can we sort of describe that? Even this idea of like building and learning and training when the chat function is still not as wholesome and developmental of your whole soul as having that same conversation with friends and family. So how do we preserve conversations with human beings when their argument will be the artifact came out the same?
One thing that I'll just throw out there, and you guys can take it or leave it. I mean, University of Austin just got rid of college admissions essays entirely. Um, as an admissions criterion, because it's all basically slop and you can't really draw anything. It's also kind of unfair, I mean, for a lot of reasons. So one thought is just don't do them anymore. Do interviews and do other things, but maybe don't do those anymore. The other thing is that, I think we're never going to outsmart AI. Like, we're not going to outsmart it. It's always going to outsmart us in some way. So let's stop trying to outsmart it. Let's outwise it. And so I think that means sometimes you do have to adapt your approach a little bit. But arguing with students about why something is more valuable versus something else, you're almost too late in the process, right? If their heart isn't in it, if their heart is not in, I'm coming to this college because I want the real deal. I want the focal experiences. I want this life more than just the academics. I want this life. I mean, it's too late almost because you're arguing over, technicalities, essentially. You're saying, well, I'm going to try to make this marginal case for you when there's no heart in it. They have to have their heart there first.
Well, yeah, I affirm so much of that. Whether it's too late or not, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. The IHP guys, they said what we're giving you as 18 and 19-year-olds is great, but it'd be better if you got it as 8 and 9-year-olds. And that's why the founders of Care Paravel Latin School in Topeka went and founded the school, because they're like, we want it when they're young. I mean, and part of what we're doing in Templeton is introducing them to this life as 18-year-olds, even if they haven't had that formation yet. And so, yeah, we don't accept the personal essay. I don't really care. I have they have to respond to certain quotes I give them from Anna Julia Cooper, whomever else. But even that, they could use AI. And so we try to say, hey, your integrity, your integrity is worth more than this, right? These don't use it. Then we do the interviews and those kinds of things. But that is reframing the ends of education for these 18-year-olds who have received for 12 years this sense that what matters is the artifact that's produced, not that I produced it, And so I don't know that I have much advice for you there, like counsel on the college admission exam or essay, other than not using it or something.
Some colleges and some organizations are asking people to do writing on the spot. My daughter applied for a doctoral program. She was accepted, but they asked her to write an essay in the office and have a conversation with her. And then I think, when I was at St. John's, you sometimes will write a brief paper and you have to copy the paper 14 times and give it to all of your classmates. And then you have to read everybody's essay before a discussion. And I think they're still doing that. And I don't think if you're using ChatGPT, you would embarrass yourself. So I think the ways around it, and a number of professors are moving to oral examinations again and blue book exams. So I think that's a positive trend.
Oxford doesn't have to change anything because that's what it's been doing. Yeah, I got it.
I think we believe that they actually still would have known themselves better
Through a person.
Through
a real person. But
I have a question by Jen Frey.
Yeah. So I'm a little bit alarmed at the suggestion that AI might produce better results, because I think on that way of assessing it, you actually are just not taking seriously the fact that we're talking about personal information. An LLM is not a person. I think people forget that because it appears that has all of these person-like features. It is not a person. And even when it comes to studying language, I took that for 4 years in college. And I remember every single one of my lab teachers. One of them used to regale us with stories about living under communism in Eastern Europe and what it was like to
Yeah.
study Latin in that context. The other one used to come in and would always start class with one of Cicero's famous speeches. And, and also I learned in a community, right, of people. Most of them, right, I still remember. And I think that I would hope that classical educators, above all, understand, right, that when we're talking about personal formation, it's personal on both sides. And what gets lost when we just focus on outputs or grades or whatever, or we try to atomize education. The education is something that has to happen in community and has to be deeply personal. And a teacher, right, is in the best case, a true exemplar. I think someone mentioned that. So thank you. But that is the fundamental thing. And I just think we can't use that. I'm not saying that AI can't be a tool, but the idea that we can give subjects over to AI. I mean, I hear this all the time with languages. I think it's really
I think the way I'd respond to that is to say that I actually think the role of the teacher is so important that I would love to see teachers be able to actually soar. And by soar, I mean actually engage with texts, the target texts. And oftentimes, if all of your time is spent on learning the conjugations and declensions, you're not in the target text. You're not reading the languages. You're not engaging the ideas. And I actually think that's exactly where the teachers should be. That's why they are teachers. And we should be talking about virtue and all of these things. And so I don't disagree with you at all. I was simply suggesting that in some cases with some subjects that have right and wrong answers, Latin has right and wrong answers, STEM has right and wrong answers, that adaptive technology could help you accelerate that process a little bit so that students at a younger age can encounter those texts and have those conversations in class, which might inspire their love for Latin and keep them in the languages longer. So that's really the only suggestion I was making, not that we replace teachers. In fact, I want more teachers. I want Latin and Greek to be ubiquitous, which means we'll need more teachers. So that's the only thing. I was not suggesting that we get rid of their role. In fact, the whole point of doing it that way would be so that they could have those meaningful in-class conversations and so forth and so on. So I don't disagree with you. I was a classics major. I have a master's in classics. I can't tell you how many memorable things, relationships. It's all meaningful to me. The only thing that I can say now is that some of my professors would love to have done more faster with us, and that's all. So, yes.
So I'm wondering if you could give kind of a predictive view in terms of ecosystems. I'm thinking of media ecology and the way that we see over and over throughout history, new technology comes in and it doesn't just change one thing, but it pervasively changes the landscape, right? Yeah. So a lot of the conversation around AI, as with previous technologies, is about specific uses, like, to do a footnote, to learn the Latin, and it'd be sort of like if after the combustion engine, people said, well, should we do this? Well, yeah, if we're going to church or taking a sick kid to the hospital, it's good. If we're going to church to make out, it's not good. But the combustion engine transforms society, patterns of living, and the disassociation of work from home, from all these kind of very pervasive things. So I'm wondering, when you look at AI, and specifically with regard to education, what do you predict or what are you thinking about the kind of metaphysic of this technology and the way in which over time it will pervasively not just be a new player in the battlefield, as it were, but change the entire parameters of the battlefield with regard to things like what is a human being? What is the nature and value of human communication? what is human formation? I mean, the question about sort of learning about yourself, like, how do you think about those kind of broader ecological sort of shifts in the metaphysics, which obviously have huge implications for education?
Could I just start with this? Because this is why I asked that question about, are we willing to perhaps create our own alternative structures, communities, and perhaps pay a cost to not be in the mainstream? Because I suspect, exactly as you're saying, that we are at this kind of existential turning point that we may not want to kind of fit ourselves to go along with. I don't have all of what that might look like, but I just have a strong suspicion that there will be this broad ecological transformation. But I will let my smarter colleagues flesh out what that might look like.
When are they coming on stage?
David, would you like to join us?
I was going to say, Diener should be asking.
Yeah, would you want to take a crack at answering your own question?
No, I'm interested in what you guys think. I mean, I have thoughts, but I'm interested in what you think.
Yeah, I'm interested in what you think.
So, like the broader impact upon society and culture generally of AI. I mean, is that
one example
yeah?
that maybe to you could rip on would be like, let's say the way in which throughout the whole tradition of classical education, verbal arts have been fundamental to what it means to be a human being. So like John of Salisbury or Quintilian, these arguments that like what separates us from the rest of the animal kingdom is our reason, which is expressed through
Articulate speech.
So that fundamental to what it means to be a human being is the nature of language. Okay, well then that provides a kind of justification for teaching a lot of the things that we do that cultivate the verbal arts and all of the ramifications in our students, right? So this would be like one example. What are ways in which AI is fundamentally shifting or over time will fundamentally shift the relationship between what it means to be a human being and the use of language? And then what are the educational implications of that?
So I'm thinking where Augustine, riffing off of Cicero, says, to be human is to err, but not to resist error is to be diabolical. And I think that there is a diabolical temptation for us to lose our humanity in this whole arena. It's going to take a great deal of prudence. I have no idea exactly how it's going to, well, I have some ideas how it might go, but I think we are going to be overwhelmed by this. I think that the trend is unmistakable. The vast majority of people, like you're pointing out in the universities, are going to adapt it without prudence. They're going to do it. They're going to just go crashing into it. And we should be observing very carefully what happens all along the way so that we're not caught flat-footed 15 years after the fact. I think we should be testing and experimenting with various forms of it. I think we should probably try to contain it, but I think it's going to go everywhere. And I think there are going to be businesses, publishing companies, textbooks. There's going to be agentic AI tutors for every subject. We had a proposal, our company had a proposal from a company to take our logic curriculum and turn it into an agentic AI, where it would be contained, but all of our logic curricula would just be in an AI tool that could be used to teach students. We passed on that, but we're still studying what this means. What would it look like? Could we have some form of a contained AI that just controls what we have? And what's going to happen when a competitor comes out and says, here is the logic tutor that will teach you all of the fallacies and all of formal logic. It's all online and it's really inexpensive and it does everything your curriculum does and it does it better by some standard. But it's not, but no one's becoming like Brian. No one's becoming like their teacher. There's no human interaction. And so I think that's going to happen. And so as a publishing company, a curriculum publishing company, we're asking this question, what is this going to mean for us? That's one area that we're watching. I wonder how you would respond. What other areas?
It's going to be, don't you think, David? I mean, it's not going to I don't know if I don't like using language to make us less human, but it's going to make it harder to see what it means to be human, perhaps. And that's why I still think we need people to witness to what we think constitutes a kind of flourishing human life, even if it makes us look odd. I mean, a couple things come to mind, like when my students come over to my house for class, or like, Dr. Williams, where's your TV? I haven't had a TV for 30 years. Why? Well, it's distracting, and it's a large black piece of plastic in my front room, and aesthetically, it's awful. So I don't want a TV. And they're like, well, and when are you coming in class? We're like, well, I take the train in. Back to your combustion engine thing, because we've only ever had one car we haven't had two cars since my wife and I were dating 30 plus years ago. Why? Well, because I don't want to be caught up in this kind of, hectic life of jumping in my car and racing everywhere. So I walk, I bike, I train. It means I have to live slightly slower and plan my days a little bit more. But it's a small witness to my students of trying to step outside of this, like, the car culture, if you will, in America, that you don't really have in Europe. Because in Europe, my students, my kids, when we move back to the States, they're like, we miss walking everywhere. We miss biking everywhere. We miss seeing our neighbors walking to school. Well, that doesn't happen because of the particular ecology and economy that we live in the States, which is developed around driving. And so there's something lost there. So to think that we might have people who live in a different way and practice in a way to witness to that, I think that's something we have to attend to. But the other thing that comes to mind is the arts and crafts movement of like the late 19th century with William Morris and Edward Burne-Jones, which were resisting industrial technology or resisting industrialization. And they said, no, we want everybody to have handcrafted, tables and chairs and hand stamped, wallpaper and these kind of things. And it was beautiful. The arts and crafts movement has had a huge impact for the last 150 years, but it was unsustainable because it was too expensive. And nobody could actually afford these kind of wonderful things that they were doing, which is kind of to your point, like, what about when somebody else comes along, a competitor, and offers, maybe a lesser product, but so much cheaper that then everybody goes towards it. But I don't know that meant that, like, what the arts and crafts movement guys were doing, they shouldn't have done. I think they should have done as a witness, even if it didn't have the kind of transformational impact, culturally that it could have. So I'm musing on your question right now. I don't know that I have, kind of the predictive ability to think how it's going to change.
I think parents are opting into classical education. I don't know what else needs to be said about it. I mean, this company is blowing up. It's expanding. I mean, people are opting into classical education. They want it for a reason. So whatever is happening is attractive, which is what I meant when I said earlier, keep being weird. Like you are already a witness. You are already saying we're doing something different here. We're creating different kinds of learning in the classroom and different kinds of relationships between students and teachers. There's no reason not to continue doing that. I think I'm just with Chris saying that doesn't mean you can't experiment on the margins and learn from, different things and maybe improve here and there to get you closer to your telos. But that shouldn't be the center of what's going on. The center is what's already happening. And boy, do parents want it. I mean, you can't build them fast enough. In the schools and the states that have, expanded school choice I'll tell you, they can't open those schools fast enough. So,